Self-belief and never giving up. I've been a small business owner for 10 years now, and that's not where my story starts or where it ends. But I want to tell you kind of a rough synopsis on my background in the hopes to inspire young entrepreneurs or people who are dying for a change. In school, I never did well, but I was constantly one of those kids that they told like, hey man, if you just applied yourself, you would succeed. Unfortunately, in high school, because of my home life being a disaster, I ended up dropping out. And, for the latter part of my senior year, I was sleeping in a friend's dining room on the floor. I was pretty much homeless. I had no car. I was working part-time, and now I'm a high school dropout. I went back later to get my GED, and I ended up graduating from GRCC with a business administration degree. Although, if I'm being completely honest with you, I learned more from the music business and other illicit trades that I might have been involved in at the time. I got into the music business when I was 16. And I fell quickly into the role of being like the booking agent and the manager. It was just something that I was kind of natural at. I would book the shows, I would get us in magazines, get us on the radio. We even had a couple TV appearances, design the merch, design the flyers, promote the shows, find screen printers, and really just handle all of the business affairs for the band. That was definitely my first passion, and I stayed with it till 2012, always keeping that role of the manager. And in those 12 years, I learned a lot about the ins and outs of business, and I made a lot of mistakes. I was a kid, but I've learned from those mistakes, and I've been able to take those going forward. During my time at GRCC, I started my first business. It was called KG Power Washing. I used student loans to finance the pressure washer and the necessary equipment that I was gonna have. And for being 23 years old, I was making pretty decent money. And unfortunately, what I found out was that in Michigan, pressure washing is a seasonal business. So after 3 years, I decided to close KG Power Washing, and that was my first business failure. I re-entered the workforce into construction, and in those years, I was doing a lot of work with restoration companies, just like fire, mold, and water damage. And I went from being a grunt to being a finish carpenter at my last job in 3 years. Thankfully, I had this reluctant mentor named Jim who taught me a lot about the trades, and then I worked my ass off to learn and to become good at this skill. At these jobs, these companies would always involve me with like the business side of things because I think they realized like I had promise or I had potential, and also like I really cared about my work. I was able to see a path forward here. I was able to understand that if I got into the office, if I could just get into the office, like that was going to be a money-making venture for me. And I learned a lot. I was able to write standard operating procedures. I was able to write inventory management protocols and do scheduling, etc. Those were invaluable lessons that I got. In 2014, I forced the last company that I worked for to lay me off, and I was on unemployment for 2 weeks before I started Claris Home Solutions. And I started that from the ground up, from literally nothing. I borrowed $900 from a couple friends. I borrowed some tools. I didn't even have a garage, but I was just convinced that I could make something work. I took the skills that I'd gathered from the music business. I designed a flyer, designed a business card. I got some business insurance. I started advertising on Craigslist, and I was very fortunate to find my niche very early on, and I was able to take that and run with it. That's one of the things that I definitely want to tell people is find your niche, find where you fit in, and exploit that. That is how you make your money. So 2023 was Claris's best year yet, and that's pretty exciting. We're now 10 years into this thing, and it continues to grow. I have a great vendor network. I have a great staff, and I have to be honest, I am nothing without my team. And this is another key point that I want people to remember is key people in key places. That is a lesson that I learned very early on, and I think it is very important for all entrepreneurs to remember is key people in key places. Write that down and never forget it. So here I am. I've had, this business is successful and it's doing well. And unfortunately, in 2019, I started to suffer from burnout. And at that point, I started just kind of throwing things at the wall. I was like, man, I just really need to get out of this workload from construction. It's just too much stress. I'm constantly dealing with stress and putting out fires, and it became a problem. The first business that I tried to start was the first iteration of Crash Gordon, and I had decided that I wanted to do screen printing. So I went on Facebook Marketplace and I found a used screen printing setup, and I built a few different things, and then I literally learned how to screen print from YouTube. And I taught myself how to do that. I got a couple clients in the door, and I was really focused on delivering quality products. And what I ultimately realized is that doing screen printing was not for me. I have a ton of respect for the people who are able to do this and to do this well, but that is a hard business. And that is also a business that you have to do a lot of volume to make money. And for me at the time, that was just something that I didn't want to do. So then we get to 2020, and 2020 is probably the hardest year in my life, by far, bar none. And I think it was a hard time for a lot of other people as well. But in February, my mother passed away unexpectedly. In March, obviously, the world started to shut down from COVID. And then in April, I lost my dog of 14 years. Coupled that with the burnout that I was experiencing, and I had just kind of had enough at this point. I remember really vividly, I was on a job site and I was trying to install a light fixture, and I just physically could not make myself install this light fixture. And at that point I went outside and I started calling my clients, and I was just like, hey, like I'm gonna take some time off. And that was really tough to do. I mean, especially for me, because I was really worried about opening the door to other vendors coming in, people taking my work. Maybe these customers would never work with me again. And you know, I took 3 months off, and at the end of the day, like everything ended up fine. During those 3 months, I went camping, I went with my son, I went by myself. I just tried to get away from society and to try and just heal from everything that had been going on. And instead, I started to formulate another business. I decided that I wanted to open a gym.